On the podcast today, we are going to talk about the life and teachings of Alan Wilson Watts. Alan Watts, for those of you who are familiar with just his normal name. Mm-hmm. But Alan has been influential for a lot of people on the spiritual path. For you and I personally, he has been an influential figure. We've read a lot of his books. And, you know, he has an amazing ability to, we were talking about this before the podcast, an ability to be like a scholar, but it's the scholarly work is accessible for ordinary people. So he has this amazing ability to translate and relate the deepest wisdom in the world to a novice, but also it's still profound for an advanced person. And that's why a lot of people, when they think about Alan Watts, they think of him in the sense of a polymath. So someone who was just, you could give Alan anything. Like, what about what about what's happening in the economy, Alan? And Alan would have a way of explaining it that would make sense, right?
Yeah, 100%.
100%. So, and we'll speak about everything about Alan through this podcast. What we'll do is we'll speak a little bit about his life briefly, his trials and tribulations, and we'll go into a lot of the quotes in my books, just to unpack a lot of his teachings, so we can get a deeper understanding of Alan's mind, which is very important. So, Alan was the author of 25 books, as everyone knows, and he is famous for his lectures. But I would say, and you would agree with me here, that his written word is so underrated. Like, a lot of people, I know that his books are famous too, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people shine a light on his, you know, the way that he speaks is very eloquent, and there's not many people like him, right? Like the way that he can verbalize this knowledge.
Yeah, he's very sharp-witted, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he could converse this higher knowledge with just a casual language and with such easy and fun manner. I think that's why he's very popular.
He's very popular.
Yeah.
More so popular now than he was in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah.
So, and, you know, there's so many things about Alan, like a lot of selflessness in Alan's life, like you were mentioning about the TV series that people are familiar with, Eastern Wisdom for Modern Living, like.
Yeah, that when he was really young man.
Yeah.
The black and white screen lecture. Yeah.
And he did it all for free, right?
Yeah.
Like it was a labor of love, like.
Yeah, pretty much. It was volunteer work for him, and he just wanted to share the knowledge with as many people as possible, and he did work for free, basically.
Well, it's kind of interesting on this sort of path, right? When you're talking about, especially ancient Eastern wisdom, you know, if you want to make money, it's kind of not the path to get into, but if you want to know yourself at a deeper level, then this is
definitely. I mean, it didn't change much from then and now.
No,
right?
no, exactly. So, well, let's unpack Alan's life. You know, Alan was born January 6, 1915, in Chislehurst in London. Chislehurst, I might be pronouncing that wrong. And he, you know, like he always had an ability. They said from a young age he was reading a lot of texts and stuff like that. His grandma influenced him a lot, especially with like Asian wisdom and things of this nature. But then Alan became he ended up becoming an Anglican priest, right? Eventually, and but then he moved away from that because of his deep interest in the East, and you know, we know everything about, you know, most of us probably know the whole trajectory of Alan's life, where, you know, lived, and he was an influential figure in the counterculture movement, and then he eventually passed away November 16, 1973, at the age of 58. So a young man, right, basically.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, to speak about more in detail, when he was a child, I think his mother was a Christian, very religious person. And so he got a lot of influence by that side of the family. Yeah, and when he was a little boy, like some of his mother's friends doing some missionary work going over in East, especially in China, and they sometimes brought over the Chinese artwork with them and introduced to young Alan, and then he got really fascinated by that spacious and nature and human and the kind of relationship that he found in the paintings and things like that, and start to have this wonder about the Eastern world. And through that artwork, that he had this growing interest of Eastern culture, basically, I think. That's why it kind of interesting mix, isn't it? Like he got influenced by his mother, her being a strong Christian religious woman, and that's why he became a priest. And again, like he had a keen interest in theology as well in general, but then he had this really curious and wonder about Eastern knowledge as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I heard Anne Watts, actually, his daughter Anne Watts, saying that, because he became familiar with a lot of the artwork of the East, and also through his grandma as well, that Alan had said to her he was either going to become an artist or fall into this sort of path he fell into, because she said he was actually quite a brilliant artist, like painter. And no surprise, Alan was very gifted at calligraphy for someone who's not from China, and he was very gifted at calligraphy. And so he had kind of an artist's mind. And it's interesting because that kind of artist's mind is kind of filtered into his writing and also his lectures, right? Like, because that's where he has that innate ability, like what we said, to have scholarship, but also making it accessible for just everyone, like advanced or beginner.
Yes. I think it's something about him that he was born with, which is just that free spirit that I think which is was in his gene. That like he was so knowledgeable about like classical music and art in general, and then he crossed over that knowledge to philosophy. I think that's why he had this such talent to deliver the knowledge in such easy manner and such like a music in your ears, isn't it? Like it's very easy to understand from reading his books.
Yeah, exactly. And like every book, right? Like every book is a knockout of the park. It's not like an average book. Every book's a home run by him. You know what I mean? Like it's not like you get an average book. Like people ask always you and I, what are our favorite Alan Watts books? And it's like, well, it's hard to say really. Like, I mean, we can give a handful, right? Like
it depends on your mood, I think, because every single books are really good.
Yeah. Good. But what would be your favorite? Like, kind of like a general.
Most for me personally, that most kind of book that came to me and touched my heart the most would be, I would say, the book, because the book is basically talking about the Vedanta, the Hindu philosophy, and the non-dualism. But I don't think he mentioned much about the word of Vedanta or Hinduism that much in the book entirely. But the whole book is about that. In saying that he is explaining this knowledge of Vedanta in such easy way to understand for all of us, and just like a very casual language, that how the life is this great game of hide and seek, basically, and that his understanding about that is such really easy way to understand it. That's why, obviously we were reading different Hindu scriptures like Gitas and Upanishads and all that, and some concepts may sound a little bit more confused than not. But then reading the Alan's book, the book, it's called the book. It gave me much more clear understanding of the bigger picture of what Vedanta is about.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with you. Like, personally, like when people are coming into spirituality and they say, "What book would you recommend?" I say the book, because even though like you could say that book can be for also, and this is the genius of the man, for advanced people, or it could be like reading the book is like reading the Mandukya Upanishad. To be honest with you, like. Except, Alan does mention Vedanta in there, but very briefly. But it's mainly about Vedic philosophy and also a mixture of obviously Buddhism and Taoism, and the concepts of the game of black and white. So the game of obviously this and that, like the Zhuangzi, the Advaita perspective of dissecting the world into partiality and this and that. He goes deep into that, but he explains it in a way that's like, it would be hard to replicate for someone to, because his mind was attuned to, like you said, like he had some sort of innate ability to do this, to articulate that deep knowledge in such a way. And definitely the book, for me personally as well, if you had a gun to my head, I would say that's my favorite Alan Watts book. But in saying that, I don't like to play favorites, and there's a bunch of books by Alan I like. I love Tao the Watercourse Way. I love The Way of Zen. I love The Joyous Cosmology, The Wisdom of Insecurity.
Become What You Are.
Oh yeah, but that was a later book. That was not from his hands, right? That was a transcription.
Okay.
So as you know, there's 25 books he wrote with his bare hands, and then there's 1,000 books after it that are being transcribed. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. I support that. But written by his own hands, Psychology East and West.
Oh, yep. Nature, Man and Woman.
Oh yeah, brilliant. Yep.
Yeah.
And you read some of those in Korean, right?
Yeah, but it was such a poor translation, so I have to read it again in the real language.
In English, yeah. But I think nowadays they must have better translations in Korean of what's work. Well, you would assume. But...
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah,
I didn't look into much because I actually prefer to read the real language that he actually wrote.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But those books, like like for example, like when we talk about The Way of Zen, right? If someone wants to know about Zen, there's two books I recommend to them. It's Introduction to Zen Buddhism by Daisetsu Suzuki and The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. Now, a lot of people will go throw their hands up who are Zen purists, but just the way that both of those gentlemen can explain Zen in a way that's accessible for everyone and at such a deep level, even though both of them, you could say, weren't your stereotypical Zen practitioners, but they were Zen scholars. And sometimes a scholar has a better way of languaging things than someone who is actually too absorbed. And actually, Alan explains that in The Way of Zen, if you remember. Someone said to Alan, why you can speak about Zen the way that you do speak about Zen is because you have a certain distance from the whole monastic thing, right? So, and another book that I really love, it was his last book that he wrote with his own bare hands, which was Tao the Watercourse Way. And when you read that, you're just like, it's kind of like Alan at the height of his wisdom, his maturity as an individual. And that is like, it's hard to describe that book because it's like riding on water. Like there's just a flow in that book that you're just like, I don't know, how this is quite possible. An individual could write a book like this. And Al Huang wrote the foreword for it, and they were good friends, obviously. And Al, he wrote, it's pretty emotional foreword, right? Because that was published after Alan had passed away, So, and we said we weren't going to get emotional on this podcast. It's going to be difficult, Anyway, but yeah, that. It's hard to talk sometimes about Alan. But I remember reading The Watercourse Way. We were in Bangkok, actually, and living in Bangkok, and basically doing nothing. and I was finishing off actually writing The Science and Practice of Humility, which was 9 years ago, something now, and just lying on bed, just reading this, and just mind boggled, like how someone could. Write a book like that, and that was one of the last kind of books of that I had read of his, because I read a lot of books before that of his, but it just a testament to the man, you know what I mean? Like the ability that just translate that sort of wisdom, you know what I mean, in such an accessible way, and I think that a lot of people don't really value the work that he left behind, and I think that's we're going to talk about that in a minute, but those sorts of books, like the book, Watercourse, Tao the Watercourse Way.
And another good thing about Alan Watts' book is that, like, if you were to study Vedanta, for example, the Gitas are like this thick and like sizes like this, right? But the book is very thin and it's quite small book, and you can put in your little pocket bag if you have. So it's a small and concise, such fun to read. So that's why I think much more approachable for us. And also I think it's kind of a book that you can read time to time, again and again. Like you said, you read it 9 years ago. I probably read it around that time, same. But I should actually read it again now. Then I can maybe get something more out of the book, which I didn't get before, right? So that's just kind of perennial classics, actually.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, I mentioned this on the podcast before. When people say, "What book will you take away to you if you go on a sadhana to Tiruvannamalai?" And I say, "Well, I'll take the book, and I might take also Tao the Watercourse Way." And people think like, "Huh?" Like taking Alan Watts with you, and it's like, but there's a thing about it. You know what I mean? Not that I would take just those two books, but they would be two that I would take, right? Now, a reason why I wouldn't probably take, say, The Way of Zen, for example, because The Way of Zen is a different book. It's a book about Zen, and
it's quite scholarly.
It's quite scholarly, yeah. Where the book and Tao the Watercourse Way is Alan writing on water. You know what I mean?
It's like a journal or essay or. Yeah.
And the book encapsulates, I think, the book, the subtitle is The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, is that book kind of encapsulates Alan's mind, I think, and the way that he thought about the world. And the way that he thought about the world was a very Vedic way. So there's no such thing as a separate self, right? There's no... the jiva, the Gayang, the Jason, everyone watching and listening, is an illusion. It's a persistent illusion, but it's an illusion, right? There's only Brahman, or only the Tao, right? And so Alan, in all of his lectures and that, always kind of comes back to that kind of teaching, and that's reflected a lot in the book. So that's why we talk about the game of black and white, the game of hide and seek. Again, these ways he languages it, right? Like the game of hide and seek. Like when you hear that, and you're like, he takes like a kid's game and superimposes it onto something of the greatest nature, right? So, that's right. But that's the genius of the man. Yes. It's the genius of the man, And so, in saying all that, obviously Alan was one of the great figures in the counterculture movement. Yeah. So one of the, let's say one of the great gurus, so to speak. Obviously Ram Dass,
Timothy Leary.
Yeah. Who else? Christmas Humphreys.
Aldous Huxley.
Oh, Huxley, of course, yeah. And what a time to be around, yeah. Like, because when I think of Watts, and I think of that period of time, not just the counterculture movement, but before that, like the 40s and the 50s and that. And he was writing in the 40s and 50s. Is the amount of sort of great individuals in that period of time. Like you mentioned Huxley, we mentioned Daisetsu Suzuki before. Christmas Humphreys. Even if you go further, Gary Schneider and people like this. And
Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell. And it was interesting the other day, we were talking privately when we were saying, Joseph must have been younger than Alan, right?
Yeah, because his memory is more vivid than Alan.
Yeah.
But he's older.
He's old. It's crazy, isn't it? It just goes to show how young Alan sort of died and how long Joseph lived. And so he was an influential figure in that period of time. And you're going to be... There's two ways with all of this, right? It's a double-edged sword. You're going to be at the forefront of people's minds and what you're doing, but also you're going to be one that's going to garner criticism as well, right? And he was, even though, we want to focus on the positive. We need to talk about, some of the criticism about Alan Watts, to be transparent. And, a lot of the criticism came from probably the way he languaged certain things, like in Zen, right? In Zen, for example, like even though he was friends with Daiset Suzuki, like Daiset had, for those who don't know who Daiset Suzuki is, DT Suzuki, Daiset had criticized him for certain things he mentioned about Zen and other people as well, right? And some people were more, Daiset wasn't so, would you say, he wasn't aggressive about it. But there's other people who are very aggressive about it, you know what I mean, who are like Zen purists, so to speak. And
yeah, they had such a bit more rigid understanding of Zen Buddhism, I think, more traditionalist.
Yeah, traditionalist thing, yeah. And Alan understood the tradition too, you know what I mean? But he's languaging it in a way that's, let's say, fresh, right? Fresh for people and approachable for people. And it's not that he was not right on 99% of the time, because he was. There's these people who criticize him were looking at certain technical aspects of what he had said and paraphrase some things that he may have said. And sometimes when we're in a conversation, we may say things that you may think, oh, maybe I was wrong in that situation, and it's all hindsight, right? It's not that everything that we say is absolute. I mean, this is a big problem still in the world today. People listen to someone and they go, oh, that's what you think. And it's like, we're just in conversation. Like, take a chill pill. I mean, we're all going to die one day. Relax. Life's not serious. And so, but then, in saying that, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, right? Before we get into the quotes and before we get into his teachings, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Like, a lot of people are probably familiar with Alan's alcohol issues. A lot of people believe he was a womanizer.
Oh, right, yep.
Yeah, and things like this, you know what I mean? He did have a few wives, right? Like, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think the problem with that is a lot of people discount his whole work based on that. And Anne Watts, his daughter, she gets a little bit heated about that. And she said that, when we talk about Alan about those things, like, these are just they were his foibles, right? Like his personal weaknesses. And we all have our own, as a character, we all have our own personal weaknesses. And usually what the moralists or the woke people like to do is they like to, cancel people and pull people up for certain things that they've done in their lives, but they don't look at themselves. So they project on other people, but they've got a lot of things about themselves. And we all do, right? We all do have personal weaknesses. And some is more so than others, right? And we don't know Alan personally, so we don't know why, especially towards the end of his life, why alcohol became a big thing, right? It wasn't like alcohol was a big thing his whole life, but it became a big thing towards the end of his life.
Yes. Again, I think that is also just being part of somewhat getting alienated by the whole society thing, I think. Him being who he was, I don't think it was emotionally very easy life, I don't believe, because, we sometimes feel it too. So that having all this knowledge and this, a whole different understanding of the fabric of reality, basically, had given him completely different outlook in life and the world and society and whatnot, right? And belief system and this kind of stuff. So a lot of things that he must had something like a disagreeing with social norms, so to say. And I think he was a heavy smoker and drinker later in his life and things like that. It's just a reflection of a somewhat a frustration, disappointment, and
Yeah, it could be all of that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and something like that. And I again, you can make it as negative as you want that about him, but in a sense, to me, that how much of a human he was as well. That is to show that he was also one of us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
He wasn't up in the
clouds,
the clouds, or acting like a king or anything.
No.
He wasn't anything like that. He was just as a really ordinary individual as like anyone else. And that's what I think about that side, actually. Yeah.
Actually, you raise a good point, because I think maybe some of the reasons for all of that was because the weight of maybe expectation on Alan, like he was, a genius, but in the same sense, he understood he was just a human, right? Like you mentioned, he's a human, and it's we don't know, right? It's hard for people deal with certain things in certain ways, and so that's we don't know him personally. We don't know the reasons behind a lot of it, and I don't think many people do. I think that died with Alan, and so I think that there was a lot of that. Like, he just wanted to be recognized, maybe just as just an ordinary guy, but then everywhere he went, like if he'd lecture in Europe or in America,
he had such a good amount of followers back then because of that kind of culture movement.
Yeah, of course.
He was very popular.
Very popular, and so there is a weight of expectation, right? Because especially with spirituality in the West, where people usually have a moralistic version of spirituality, which is a Christian version of spirituality. And so they expect spiritual teachers to be a certain way. And so when they see Watts smoking a pipe and, having psychedelics and, whatnot, then people, slander their name, And I think that that's a very sad thing, because you're not really seeing who the individual is, what they're leaving behind, the great work that they're doing, and how they're just helping people. You're focused on personal character and the foibles of someone. You're not focused on what they're actually contributing to society and to the spiritual upliftment of people. And that makes me a bit angry when I see a lot of people slander his name, because they focus too much. It's a Christian mentality. They focus on the negative side of an individual, as opposed to all of the great work that they had done. You try write 25 books. Seriously, it's difficult. I've only wrote how many now? 6? I mean, it's work. It's a lot of work, and you have to, like what Anne Watts said, like when Alan would write a book, he would go into retreat, and he would be just so focused he didn't have time for anything else, like nothing, like not even family. And so, and that personally with me too, like when I'm writing a book, I just have no time for anything. People are writing to me on Facebook and that, and it's like I can't answer these questions. Like, I don't have the mental capacity, the bandwidth, so to speak. And so, because of all of this, because of Alan's alcoholism and this and that, like Westerners have this big tendency for spiritual one-upsmanship, so they start to slander his name, so forth and so on, right? And there was a situation I wanted to mention, and this is kind of like an exclamation point on the whole thing, right? Like, where we don't even have to talk about it any further, because back when Shunryu Suzuki went to California, the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki, and was teaching American practitioners and this and that around the same time, and one of the students, this is a famous story, one of the students actually said, when they talked about Alan in like a sort of a satsang setting, one of the students said, we used to think he was profound until we found the real thing. So basically slandering his name, like saying that, we used to think he was profound in the Zen sense until we found the real Zen, in air quotes, right? And Shunryu Suzuki was pretty sharp in his response and was angry. You know what I mean? And when you get a Zen master angry, you're a spot of bother. And so Suzuki said, you completely missed the point about Alan Watts, so about who he was. You should notice what he has done. He is a great bodhisattva. And that's just an exclamation point, you know what I mean? See, Shunryu's not looking at, alcohol issues and this and that, and he said a certain thing that may not make sense to Zen and whatnot. But, I mean, what are you looking at? You're just looking at, you're nitpicking things. You're nitpicking things.
That's true.
And see, Suzuki, being new to America, had never come across this mentality. Because as you know, as an East Asianer, you don't have this mentality where you, like, nitpick at a person to tear them down to make yourself feel better. That's a very Western thing, right? And so Westerners get in this game of spiritual one-upsmanship, and Suzuki was new to this, and he was like, why are they talking about this guy like this? Like, look at all the stuff that he left behind. What the hell are they talking about?
Whoever could want to criticize Alan Watts in that manner, they're really missing out a big chunk of knowledge that he left behind.
Exactly.
That's the consequence they have to pay, because from ignoring all the good work that they left behind, they're missing out big mind that you could have learned from.
Yeah.
Just from being negative towards how he was in his private life.
Yeah. Makes me angry, you know what I mean? Like, because, you know, like, this whole spiritual one-upsmanship, which has infiltrated spirituality these days, is so frustrating. And I have to deal with it on the YouTube channel, where people are playing games of trying to sound more profound than other people, and there's no humility. You know what I mean? Like, if you can learn anything from Alan Watts, learn about humility, which is what he learned through the Eastern traditions. You know what I mean? Yeah. And maybe part of his frustration is what we are talking about. Listening to people trying to sound too profound and tearing him down and this and that for no real reason at all. Just because they are bitter people, bitter and jaded people, trying to sound more profound than Alan Watts. Imagine if you were trying to sound more profound than Alan Watts. You've got no chance. You're not even in the right game. Don't start, because you're never going to sound more profound than him.
Oh, what's the whole competition about, really?
Exactly.
That's what I don't get it.
It doesn't make any sense. And that's why Suzuki shut that sort of argument down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we here in this podcast, and everyone watching, hopefully, we love Alan Watts. And if Alan is in the afterlife, we toast a vodka.
Yeah.
He liked his vodka.
Oh,
So we'll toast a vodka. I have my chai, but we'll pretend it's a vodka. Thank you for everything, Alan.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into his teachings now, right? We kind of, I mean, you could talk about his life forever. You know, he was an amazing individual. Sure, he had his critics, but most people were supportive, you know. So, and we've been in contact with his son, Mark Watts, before, many years ago. And, you know, Mark's a great guy, and all of his kids love Alan, and, you know, it's a reflection of who Alan was, you know what I mean? Alan was, as Anne Watts said, he was kind of an absentee father because he was always working and always lecturing and this and that. But that your children still love you is, you know, that means something, right? Like, I mean, how could you not? It's a father, right? So let's dive into his teachings before we get too emotional. And so we're going to read just some quotes from my books, because I got some poignant quotes in here, and, you know, we'll talk about it a little bit. This quote is from my book Enlightenment Now, and this is a bit of a long one, right? And this is from The Wisdom of Insecurity, but this is an interesting quote, and actually, even though he wrote this back in the 50s,
when I read it, I'm like, I just couldn't believe how he could come up with that kind of ideas. Yeah, and back in 50s. Yeah.
So he's talking about this perpetual anxiety within the mind of our world, right? And yeah, like he said, 50s. But again, what were problems in consciousness in the 50s are still problems now. And the problem is, as we've talked about many times in this podcast, this turning in hasn't happened on a large scale.
It's only going the other way.
It's only going the other way, yeah. Instead of turning away from samsara, we're getting our surfboard and we're like, let's surf this thing till the end of time. Yeah. See where that goes. So let's get into this quote. It's a little bit long. Most of the other ones aren't long. So this is from The Wisdom of Insecurity. When belief in the eternal becomes impossible, and there is only the poor substitute of belief and believing, men seek their happiness in the joys of time. However much they may try to bury it in the depths of their minds, they are well aware that these joys are both uncertain and brief. This has two results. On the one hand, there is the anxiety that one may be missing something, so that the mind flits nervously and greedily from one pleasure to another without finding rest and satisfaction in any. On the other, the frustration of having always to pursue a future good in a tomorrow which never comes, and in a world where everything must disintegrate, gives men an attitude of, what's the use anyhow? Consequently, our age is one of frustration, anxiety, agitation, and addiction to dope. Somehow we must grab what we can while we can, and drown out the realization that the whole thing is futile and meaningless. This dope, in air quotes, we call our high standard of living, a violent and complex stimulation of the senses, which makes them progressively less sensitive and thus in need of yet more violent stimulation. We crave distraction, a panorama of lights, sounds, thrills, and titillations into which, as much as possible, must be crowded in the shortest possible time. To keep this standard, most of us are willing to put up with lives that consist largely in doing jobs that are a bore, earning the means to seek relief from the tedium by intervals of hectic and expensive pleasure. These intervals are supposed to be the real living, the real purpose served by the necessary evil of work. This is no caricature. It is the simple reality of millions of lives, so commonplace that we need hardly dwell upon the details, save to note the anxiety and frustration of those who put up with it, not knowing what else to do. So, I mean, this covers not just any time, right? This sort of quote. And when he's saying addicted to the dope, it's kind of like the trends of the time, right? Like what's cool and what's, like what's pop culture and all of this, all of this nonsense, right? Like,
the crave for distraction and try to entertain ourselves and experience the pleasure in the shortest time. That's like, I get a bit of a goosebumps how accurate it is, I think.
Imagine if he was alive now. Because we're packing everything in, right? In our day, like we can never get off the phone. We're constantly, like our eyes are just like going through the social media feeds. Our mind is never settled. And so social media would be part of the dope, right, these days.
Yeah.
And this only contributes to, like he said, frustration, anxiety, agitation. And even if you're looking at positive things, you're still like agitating the mind constantly. Yeah. Like you're not allowing any sort of equanimity within your mind. And,
that's a really good one.
Yeah, like he said with like we're living lives that are a bore to sustain that dope, to that attraction and that distraction of the dope. It's interesting, right?
And we try to justify that this kind of lifestyle is necessary evil of work.
Yeah. This is the necessary evil of the work, right?
The work, yes.
So look, whatever, like it's a bore. But when I get home, I get to watch Netflix.
Yes,
Like,
pretty much.
You can only watch so many hours of Netflix, but you're at work like 8 to 10 hours a day. I mean...
Yeah, well, so that they make some money to pay all those bills for entertainment and sustain that kind of lifestyle.
Alan was a good example of someone who didn't go chasing money, like, when he was living in Vallejo, the houseboat. And, like he didn't, he was always on the fringes of society and just doing what he liked to do. Like there is that famous talk by him, money is no object.
Yes.
If money was no object, you know what I mean? So
that's right.
All right, so we got that one. Anything more you want to say about that?
No, I think that's good. I think we're ready.
Well, he basically answered everything that we need to know. So, I mean, and it just goes to show, like, what was yesterday's problems are still today's problems, psychologically, on a level of consciousness, right? So, and when belief in the eternal becomes impossible. That first line is poignant, right?
So already, boom.
Yeah, it's already, because, and when we look at the way that the world is now, contemplating the eternal or the infinite is something that's become
impossible,
and not even real. It's something that people don't even think is real. So,
yeah, honestly, I don't think anyone would even contemplate about such topics much anymore.
no. Well, you can contemplate it through Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, other religions, but some religions are handicapped through certain limitations, which essentially makes the idea of the eternal become finite, essentially. But that's a whole other topic. So, anyway, that one's done.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to read? You want to read one?
Yes.
Read the first one. What do you got there?
Book from Effortless Living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so this is from the Watercourse Way.
Mm.
Okay, right. The Chinese call this kind of beauty the following of Li, an ideogram which referred originally to the grain in jade and wood, and which Joseph Needham translates as organic pattern. Although it is more generally understood as the reason or principle of things, Li is the pattern of behavior which comes about when one is in accord with the Tao, the watercourse of nature. The patterns of moving air are of the same character, and so the Chinese idea of elegance is expressed as feng liu, the following of wind.
I love this quote. And that's again from Watercourse Way, right?
Yeah.
And so no surprise it was in my book, Effortless Living, because I was talking about Li in this book, and Alan explains Li really beautiful in Watercourse Way.
Yeah.
And actually very easy to understand, like when you look at that Taoist idea of Li, not the Confucian idea. The Taoist idea of Li is like that just that organic pattern in the world that we actually have psychologically, which, like he says, what's he say there? When we let with the Tao, so
the organic pattern generally understood as a reason or principle of things, but then Li is the pattern of behavior which comes about when one is in accord with the Tao.
That's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
So that Li is that pattern that we have when we come into accord with the Tao. So when we let go, then we find our own personal organic pattern. Like different leaves have a pattern, right? A leaf has a pattern, a tree has a pattern. The markings of jade as they use, the markings of jade and wood they often use as a term in Chinese. Yeah. And so people have heard us talk about Li many times on the podcast and read in my books. But it's... Alan was influenced a lot by Joseph Needham, right? And so Joseph Needham was, a great scholar in Chinese thought back in the early days. And not Joseph Needleman, Joseph Needham. So make a distinction there. And like that idea of, and Alan kind of is an illustration of that, right? Like in letting go, you find that Li in yourself.
And another thing what I've just found out that's really outstanding is that this is by fact that Li as in writing in Chinese character, in Chinese the word, the writing, is the same character of Li as in organic pattern to the patterns of moving air are of the same character.
Yeah, exactly.
So movement of air, when they say movement of air in Chinese character, it's the same character as Li.
Yeah.
So it shares that the organic pattern as Li, like you said, following your own dharma, your own path, which means you're following your Li, which is organic pattern, that is same, using the same character to describe moving air, right? How beautiful is that?
Yeah. Like Feng Lu, right? Feng Lu, the movement of wind.
Yep.
Following the wind, basically.
That's right.
And essentially you're following the Tao, right? Like, so when you've let go and you've become content in your life, and the next minute you discover your Li, and you're in sort of this harmonious union with the nature of things.
Yes.
But that's the actual process in Taoism, right? Like, so, and often people hear me talk about Taoist metaphysical psychology, when we have, it's kind of like the Tao, De as in virtue, Li, and then you have Shang Sheng and these other elements as well.
Yes. That explanation also can be said like what he famously said, do you do it or does it do you?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. Once you found your Li and you just go with it without any thoughts, then that's, maybe that does you. It does you instead of you doing it. Yeah.
So we'll come to that in a minute too, that quote. So,
Yep.
So that's it. Yeah. Anyway, we got that one sorted.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next one. This one's from the Science and Practice of Humility, my book. And this is from The Way of Zen. So Alan's explaining a little bit of Hinduism here. Okay, so Alan states, fundamental to the life and thought of India from the very earliest times is the great mythological theme of Atma Yagna, the act of self-sacrifice whereby God gives birth to the world and whereby men, following the divine pattern, reintegrate themselves with God, kind of similar to the last quote. The act by which the world is created is the same act by which it is consummated, the giving up of one's life, as if the whole process of the universe were the type of game in which it is necessary to pass on the ball as soon as it is received. Thus, the basic myth of Hinduism is that the world is God playing hide and seek with himself. As Prajapati, Vishnu or Brahma, the Lord under many names, creates the world by an act of self-dismemberment or self-forgetting, whereby the one becomes many and the single actor plays innumerable parts. In the end, he comes again to himself, only to begin the play once more, the one dying into the many and the many dying into the one. So that's a beautiful quote. I love that quote. And that's kind of that process, right, of the Atman merging with Brahman. But saying merging with Brahman implies separation, right? So the realization that the Atman is Brahman is kind of Tattvamasi. Yeah, the new background here. Alan was a big man of who always reinforced Tattvamasi. Thou art that, or that art thou. And so Alan is explaining here what you alluded to before in the book about this game of hide and seek, right? Like Maya is basically the game of hide and seek, where you're trying to rediscover Brahman, but you're caught in this game of illusion, basically. You're like back when you were a 4-year-old hiding in the cupboard from your brother. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, like this great dance of Shiva is hiding behind the curtain of Maya, and your job is to find where that dance of the Shiva is, right?
Where Shiva is,
gotta untangle that illusion of Maya.
Exactly, 100%. And so what I like about that is whereby one becomes many, the single actor plays innumerable parts, right? So we often talk about on the podcast about this localization of consciousness, which we are, but we are just a localization of the one consciousness, and we over-identify with the equipment, which is the mind and the body and so forth and so on, but we're all part of that one consciousness. And so in the end, he comes again to himself, only to begin the play once more. The one dying into the many, and the many dying into the one. So there's this constant process of dying to the many dying into the one. We kind of us merging with Brahman, and one dying into the many is probably Brahman becoming Maya, so to speak. So. It's a beautiful thing. And Atma Yagna, like the act of self-sacrifice, right, whereby God gives birth to the world. And this is a prevailing theme in Hinduism. So Yajna, Atma Yajna. I don't know why I said Yagna. Atma Yajna. So so where you constantly, like when we look at Shaivism, we talk about this a lot, where you are sacrificing your ego to merge with Shiva or Brahman. Shiva's representation of Brahman. And so that's what Atma Yajna is. It's a constant process of self-sacrifice to reintegrate with the order of the world, the actual divine pattern and order,
Yeah, this is another quote from Effortless Living. And this is also from the Way of Zen. The Buddhist doctrine of the Four Invisibles is that the void, sunya, is to a Buddha as water to a fish, air to a man, and the nature of things to the deluded beyond conception. It should be obvious that what we are, most substantially and fundamentally, will never be a distinct object of knowledge. Whatever we can know, life and death, light and darkness, solid and empty, will be the relative aspects of something as inconceivable as the color of space. Awakening is not to know what this reality is.
Yeah, so he's talking about the Four Invisibles, the doctrine of the Four Invisibles.
Yeah.
So let's put that there. Yeah, again, this is a depth of his knowledge, especially like in Buddhism, right? So,
it's really good that the last one, the awakening, is not to know what this reality is.
Exactly. So not to have a logical conclusion of what it is.
That's why he starts with these Four Invisibles, that the void, the sunya, is to a Buddha as a water to a fish, air to a man.
Yep.
There's a emptiness.
Emptiness. Inconceivable emptiness. That's not a knowledge, an object of knowledge.
Yeah, and like as he mentioned, color of space. What is the color of space?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's not to know.
Yeah.
And the awakening is not to know what this reality is. That is a real awakening.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the Upanishads too, which Alan would be alluding to as well, right? Like to know the Brahman is not to know the Brahman, but not to know the Brahman. You know the Brahman.
Same. The Tao is Tao Te Ching, the first chapter.
First chapter, yeah, exactly. As soon as you try to dissect
put the name and form, that's not it.
And then Buddhism, nama rupa, right? Nama rupa, name and form.
Yeah.
As soon as you give something name and form, you miss out on. You miss it.
Yep.
You're missing it.
Yeah, is it the Heart Sutra? The formless is the form.
Yeah.
The form is the formless. Yeah, the same thing.
Yeah. So, I like how he begins that with the Four Invisibles, because the void, shunya, is to the Buddha as water to a fish, air to a man, and the nature of things to the deluded beyond conception.
Yeah.
The nature of things to the deluded.
Yeah.
The thing is that because you got to think about it that way, right? Like when, often people use the water and fish analogy, because fish don't know
they're in the
water because that's just their life. They're encapsulated in that. That's life. Whereas, in Vedanta, they would say, we don't know we're in Brahman. We don't know. We're in Brahman, but we don't know. Maybe some people, who are really deep meditators have come to that understanding. Buddha, Shankara, or someone who's been blasted with psychedelics has had a glimpse of that reality, a brief glimpse. But we don't know we're encapsulated in Brahman, because essentially we live in Maya. We have a constructed view in our mind, which dissects the world into parts. But it's one thing.
And that is to say that Maya is not in reality. It's Maya is within your mind.
Within your mind, yeah.
That is Maya.
That's Maya, yeah. And once you get rid of that Maya in your mind, this is Brahman.
Yes.
That's what I always talk about in Advaita Vedanta, right? Like what Alan actually had said in the past in one of his lectures. He has a picture of Ramana Maharshi just before he walks out, and he always looks at Ramana's face, the one that we have. It's a famous picture of Ramana, and he always looks at Ramana and understood that Ramana's like, you don't play this game. don't play this game. Like,
Oh, all good.
all good.
All is Brahman.
All is Brahman.
All good.
Don't like come off it, Shiva.
Yeah.
Come off it. Like don't play this game,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Don't get caught up in all of this, this and that, and
Yes.
and this.
Yep.
And that's a prevailing theme in all of Eastern philosophy, right? From Zhuangzi to Gautama to, you name it, Patanjali, whoever.
Yeah.
It's this prevailing theme of that if we have this Maya view in our mind, we can't ever grasp the reality. And like what you said, the last line, awakening is not to know what this reality is. So when you're trying to know, what are you doing? You're dissecting, you're analyzing. So that's like telling a scientist, I want you to tell me, I want you to go to the lab and come up with the nature of reality. I want you to measure, I want you to do this and that. And then there's no way they can do it. I mean, they come up, quantum physics and this, they have theories and, they have come far. But the actual, what this is, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, isn't that interesting? Like, in that question for a scientist, they'll come up with the MC square and relative theory and gravity, and I don't know anything about science, but they will come up with all that sort of like mathematical equations and physics and in their language, right? But that's not it.
No, it's not
We're talking about nature of reality. Not talking about these.
Not talking about the building blocks and this and
No,
that.
that's not what we're talking about.
What is this?
What is it? That's what we're talking about.
It's like one quantum physicist, I can't remember his name. He actually came to the conclusion that all of this study that they were doing, like when they're going into the atom and this, that, he said they were going the wrong way. Because you're going into the finest detail, and it's just getting finer and finer and finer. It's almost like an infinite regress. But he said there has to be a way of kind of stepping back and trying to understand the reality from a different perspective. And this would be the different perspective,
Yes.
but it wouldn't be accepted within science, obviously.
Well, that reminds me that how David Bohm was approaching physics.
Wholeness.
Wholeness. That's what he was trying to spread his theory.
So basically, to understand the nature of reality, you can't measure.
That's right.
Because when you measure, you're pulling it apart.
Yes.
So Bohm's saying we have to understand it holistically.
Yeah.
And that's what Watts is alluding to as well. And so what does that mean? Well, we've got to get out of logical conclusions. We've got to get out of this. And that's difficult, right? Because scientists, they can't accept that. They won't accept that. In general, most people won't accept that. People like nutters like you and I and the people watching and listening, this will accept that. but in general, most people won't accept that because they would think that, but to know something, you've got to analyze it and study and this and that. Yeah, but you're talking about the greatest thing which you're a part of.
Yes.
That would be like asking the fish to analyze the water. If you finally said to them, look, this thing you're in is water, can you analyze it?
They got to rise above to see what it is.
Yeah,
right?
they got to rise above to see what it is. They don't know, they're in it. They have no idea.
Too close.
And that famous koan, the 3 pounds of flax, gives you an explanation of how we should approach it, right? Like, so in the story, when Tungshan Chochu is asked by a monk, what is the Buddha? And Tungshan says, 3 pounds of flax. The reason why it has no rational, logical conclusion is it's supposed to get you out of logical conclusion, out of rational thought. Because even thousands of years ago in Zen and all the other great traditions, there's the understanding that if you have a logic or a rational perspective of this world, you can't get it. Like that's what Watts is saying in the last line. You can't grab it, or you can't know it, because it's still an object of knowledge. It's beyond knowledge.
Right.
You can't conceive. It's incomprehensible. And that's why Tungshan Chochu said 3 pounds of flax. A lot of people said, oh, maybe he was measuring flax. And it's not, again, people analyze it. And it's like, that's not what it's about. It's about he enlightened that monk by getting him out of rationality.
Rational.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Alan, I think, really understood that. that perspective, and that's why he spoke about that a lot, about like not trying to like, don't try to get it.
Yeah.
Don't give it a name. He would say about God, don't give it a name. You know, because it's nameless. I mean, we can use Brahman or Tao or what have you, you know, but these are just things we're alluding to that incomprehensible reality that we are a part of.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love that one.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one, and this one's from from the Science and Practice of Humility. Actually, this is from Alan's book, but I just wanted to read this because this is from the Mandukya Upanishad. I don't know which translation Alan used, but just to give people an idea that what Alan was interested in, right?
Yeah.
So the Mandukya Upanishad being one of the most famous texts about Advaita Vedanta, about non-dualism, and you know, you have the Gaudapada Kataka, like, so Gaudapada was Shankara's teacher's teacher, and so who are the two of the most famous figures in Advaita Vedanta. So anyway, in Alan's book, he has the Mandukya, and so I have a quote here. It is that which is conscious neither of the subject nor of the object. Sorry, let me start that again. It is that which is conscious neither of the subjective nor of the objective, nor of both, which is neither simple consciousness nor undifferentiated sentience, nor mere darkness. It is unseen, without relations, incomprehensible, uninferable, and indescribable, the essence of self-consciousness, the ending of Maya. That's exactly what we were just talking about, right? So, and these are the texts that Alan acquainted himself with at a young age, right? And so this is pure non-dualism here, right? So it's not this, not that, it's none of that. It's incomprehensible, uninferable, and indestructible. It's the essence of self-consciousness, the Atman.
Yeah, lots of us, the spiritual masters teaching, say that like when seer and the seen is no longer there, that's once that's been unified, or unified, that's the ultimate, the self-conscious, which is Atman. Yeah.
It's the undifferentiated state.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's no longer object of what's seen, who is seeing it.
Yep.
Yeah.
The object and the subject become one.
Yes. Going beyond all that.
Beyond all that, yeah. Beyond all that. So you're not dissecting between this. You're not caught in Maya, right? So subject, object still implies Maya. Seer and seen, you're still in the world of Maya.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you don't see, like to clarify for people. It just means that you don't see with partiality.
Yes.
You've transcended the partial realm, which is actually wound up more in our ego and it's in the Maya construction within our mind.
So I mean, Alan Watts using this quote is to say he fully understood with the Hindu's mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like he understood.
Yeah, he understood. Yeah. Oh, he loved Hinduism.
Yeah.
You know, there's just no doubt.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay.
So your turn.
Another one. Then from Effortless Living. Okay, this is a comment. It's not from a book. It's just maybe from his article or something. Okay. Inability to accept the mystic experience is more than an intellectual handicap. Lack of awareness of the basic unity of organism and environment is a serious and dangerous hallucination. For in a civilization equipped with immense technological power, the sense of alienation between man and nature leads to the use of technology in a hostile spirit, to the conquest, in a quote, of nature instead of intelligent cooperation with nature.
Yeah, that's from the Joyce Cosmology.
Oh, Joyce Cosmology.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, inability to accept a mystic experience is more than an intellectual handicap. It is a serious and dangerous hallucination.
Imagine if, as I said, if Alan was alive now. The hallucination is strong.
Yeah. Very strong.
Very strong, because there is actually an inability to accept the mystical experience, right? There's inability. People think it's like something that's fake, and that's why people are turning away from spirituality in all forms.
And technology, over time, it became almost like religion.
It is a religion.
And hence, whoever said anything on Twitter or Facebook and whatnot, they uphold that idea of thought. And yeah, that's just and like ignoring everything else.
Yep.
Ignoring any other like a real logical sense.
Yeah.
Like that is to say how much they give credit to this power in the technology. Let's say, yeah.
Well, look at, like I told you, and I probably mentioned it on the podcast, one of the last live streams I did, and people were asking me about, technology and like, I was telling people, you got to get rid of these things on your ears and that all the time, because it's destroying your like nervous system and psychology, and there's science to prove that and back that up and whatnot. And not just to mention just your general state of being when you're on social media and you're playing with your phone and that all the time, what it does to your nervous system. And then some of the responses were defensive of the technology. They were defending the technology. And I said to them, imagine how ridiculous I would look if I was defending a toaster. Because there's no difference. Toaster is technology as well, right? But I would look like an idiot, right? If you said to me, that toast, I don't think toasters are great. And I'm like, and I get my back up like, what'd you say? What'd you say about the toaster? That's blasphemy. How dare you say that? And that's the resistance I feel when I talk about this. And so they better not read my next book coming out. But that's the resistance that I get when I mention these things. And I even, like, we did that podcast on the social dilemma.
Yep.
And people are on Twitter saying, it's a little hypocritical, isn't it? Like, note my sarcasm, right? Like, it's like, how can we talk about this if we can't use it, also talk about it through social media, right? Like, you and I are concerned about the health and well-being of everyone in the world. You're obviously concerned about defending Twitter.
Yeah, okay.
That's where your concern lies. You're defending technological use. For me, if we could get, if the trade-off was getting rid of all the technology, all of this digital technology to have health and sanity of the world, I'd take it any day of the week. I don't care. I prefer everyone to be healthy and sane. Ask yourself that question. Would you do the same? And, we have to really draw a line in the sand, right? Like, because Alan's talking about this, Joyce Cosmology, he wrote this in the 60s. So, like, he's understanding that technology is becoming a thing. And it's even more of a thing now. I think Russell Brand, he put out a podcast, I don't know when it was, a while back, but talking about our, like our, what do you call it? Like our attraction to technology, like our obsession about it.
Yeah.
Like, we need the next phone, we need the next app or whatever. Like, we need the next everything to do with technology. But we don't need the next book about something or this and that.
Yes.
Which is crazy, right? So we're not valuing intelligence, we're valuing digital objects.
That's the here in the quote saying that itself is, I think, the sense of alienation between man and nature. That you are defending technology over everything else. Yeah. That is the alienation between man and nature. And I think that leads to the use of technology in a hostile spirit. And that is what's happening with the increasing of suicide and teen suicide.
Yeah, for sure.
Handicapped psychology of individuals and this and that. It's not only to say that like using science to create a weapon or anything and using it in the hostile manner, not just the physical sense. And I think it's much more also to do with a psychological sense as well, that what's what the technology is actually doing to humanity itself and the human mind itself, right? Like that is very problematic.
Problematic, yeah, it is. Because people are just going crazy at each other online, aren't they? They're just mad.
And again, we talked about this maybe yesterday, that how we can't really charge people who trolling others and damaging their psychological state. And they get away with whatever the comment and things that they did online, right? Because of that, privacy laws and things like that.
Yeah, but there's got to be sometimes there has to be a change of the guard, because that can't continue.
That's what I mean. There has to be some sort of guideline or some sort of moral ethics that has to apply to the online world, right?
Yeah.
Because it is causing damage to people's mind.
People are killing themselves.
That's what I mean. Like, and people can't charge such behavior because of such thing as privacy issue and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's not acceptable.
No, it's not acceptable. Look at that Japanese actress. I think she did a little bit of wrestling, whatever, who killed herself. I don't know, 2-3 months ago, and she got trolled heavy because of something she said or done by, like, the trolling comes from anonymous random people who hide behind their keyboards, and Cheetos are hanging off all their face and stuff like that. And then once she kills herself, everyone's like, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with that." Don't start a game that you can't finish. Don't start a game you can't finish. Because like if you're in a street, right? If you are walking in the street and there's 100 of us yelling at you and that, everyone gets arrested.
Right. You're causing
unnecessary drama in public.
Yes.
Online is still public.
Public, yes.
There has to be a changing of the guard. This behavior can't continue because the health and sanity of humanity is at risk, which is what we talked about last week on the podcast. And so this can't continue. And like I am just indifferent when I get like trolls on my channel who don't have manners and speak directly at me as if they know me, but I'm a stranger technically. I'm indifferent. I'm old school, and I will deal with you in an old school manner, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because me personally, I'm polite. I have manners, and that's how I operate, and that's how everyone is supposed to operate. That's why we are humans.
Yes.
That's what makes us humans. But then you got these people hiding behind the keyboard with the Cheetos all over their face, and attacking people they don't know, and then those people kill themselves because they can't deal with the weight of criticism.
Yes.
And we're all different, right? You can be like someone who can... So Joe Rogan, right? He has his fair share of critics. But Joe is Joe, right?
Yes.
He's indifferent to that nonsense online, and he just lives his life. Some people aren't. Everyone is different.
Yeah, some people are more sensitive.
Some people are more sensitive and more fragile, and they look too much into it, which then affects them. So there has to be a way, and I talk about this in my next book coming out, there has to be a way of identifying these individuals and convicting them for, in some way, of treating people in an inhumane way.
100%.
Because we don't need no more people committing suicide and this and that from this nonsense on social media. It doesn't need to happen.
I mean, those trolls cause problems to certain individuals who have supposed to be okay with all these unreasonable criticism, and that causing a problem as well. But also the people who writing all these comment and whatnot, that world slowly losing the moral compass, I think, in general public, amongst general public. They feel it's okay to write and such things, criticism that unreasonable, like, and that is to question people's really behavior, basically. It's actually common sense, right?
Yeah.
To behave is common sense. We learn since we're born, right?
Yeah.
That's the first thing that we get to
Yeah, of
learn
course,
from
yeah.
parents.
Yeah.
And nowadays, there is no such a thing amongst any age, really. And that's at risk as well.
Yeah, people just have no respect.
No respect.
And you and I
yeah.
have talked about this privately. I wonder how many children or people were actually disciplined when they were younger by their parents. Because what I see these days is I see a lot of people who are childish but are adults.
Yeah.
And which implies to me that they weren't disciplined when they were younger. You bet your ass if I got out of line, mum and dad put the foot down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I respect them tenfold for it
Yeah,
because that's why I am the way I am now. So I often think that a lot of these people don't seem like they had any discipline in their life and were not even taught to respect just anyone. And because this is how ridiculous it is, right? Like, let's go back to the Japanese lady. She said something, right? And then for a troll, this is how easy it is. They get on Twitter, write one line, blah, and then they go back to porn. So it's for them, it's nothing. Whatever.
Yeah.
And they don't care.
Next one. Next. Click.
Yeah, they're just back on porn. You know what I mean? And that's it. But for her, she reads it, and then that lags in her mind because then she may paint a picture in her mind that, a lot of people are talking about her. And, the weight of that criticism can wear someone down. And it does, right? It does. So, but if Alan saw that these days, it'd be amazing to see a book that he would write about all of that. But
yeah, I mean, he predicted it all, actually.
Well, in saying that, when we talk about him, people using technology in a hostile manner, also he's is referring also to the way we use technology for war and
Yep.
and things of that nature, right?
Yeah, like privacy civilians and all that type of thing.
Well, atomic bomb is technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and the conquest of nature, right? So the mining industry, all of that to get products that we don't need, to waste time that we desperately need.
Yeah, all this destruction of nature is all coming from that same reason, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's what he mentions in The Joyous Cosmology, because a lot of that he's talking a lot about psychedelics and nature in that book. It's a great book. And talking about how, the advancements of technology is, weighing it down. And that's where, from weighing it down and becoming more materialistic, we have the inability to recognize the mystical experience.
That's right.
So we come to the next quote of Alan, and this is from one of his actual lectures, and it's in my book, The Science and Practice of Humility. And you mentioned this before, actually. Do you do it, or does it do you? And this is like Alan's way of expressing things is always, it's humorous, right? Like, it's funny. It's funny and profound. Do you do it, or does it do you? And he's alluding to, the it, and you as a person. Like, are you living your personal experience, or is there something else that's, living you?
Living through you.
Yeah. So, and that's that whole actual lecture, I think it is, do you do it, or does it do you? I think that's what the lecture was called. I can't remember what it was called. Something along those lines. And it is a puzzling question for a lot of people who are not familiar with this, because you've got to think about then, you've got to bring into focus the individual will versus universal will. And Alan has a famous line where he says, and people often get confused with this line, where he says, do you know how you will? And a lot of people, when they hear that, they go, will what?
Will do something.
Yeah. But the will,
Yeah.
the will over here. Do you know how you will? And it's a real weird question, right? What do you mean? Like,
It's like a riddle.
it's like a riddle, yeah. Like, what is the will?
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah, that is to say how like a deep his thought was, like how deep he was thinking. Yeah, how you will, where is that will come from? How does that work?
How does that work, yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. And so you're getting into ideas then of that, in Shaivism, for example, they talk about there's only Shiva's will, right? You think you're, on a Jiva level, on an individual persona level, you're running the show. Running the show. Only Shiva's will is happening here.
Yeah.
That universal will is playing out through you, and you get the luxury of living it. You're not controlling the thing. You have the luxury of living it. Sure, you have very small fraction of control of your life. I can control if I lift my hand now, put my hand down, this and that. But even saying that, from a Shiva perspective, even Watts would say, Shiva's still deciding that too. You're just pretending you're pretending to be this person here.
That's right.
But it's just it's the play. It's the dance of Shiva happening beautifully in harmony, in rhythm with everything else.
I love how he phrases these things because he makes these deep thought such entertaining way.
He's a spiritual entertainer. He actually said that, didn't he? He said that once. He's
not a philosopher or he's not an educator. I'm a philosophical entertainer.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah. And he kind of is, but he's selling himself short a little bit there. He is a great teacher.
Yeah.
But he's been very modest, and so, but yeah, I loved that one line, and that's actually, if you have like a sense of spirituality, it means a lot, that sort of question, because it can bring your mind back to reality then, and it also highlights why certain traditions, such as Buddhism, focus on the downregulation of your own personal will. Why that's such an important thing in Buddhism itself. So don't will to do anything. Just sit.
Yeah.
Just sit and be quiet. And it's like, yeah, but I got... And then you're going mad inside yourself and then... Agitated. But then next one, as the days go on, your interiority becomes spacious. Shanti, 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 right? All right. So you got one?
So,
this is actually your last one, and then I got one more after that.
Yep. Okay. This is from Emotional Intuition. Okay. Yeah. So I really don't know where it's from. Yeah. Okay. Spiritual freedom involves much more than going on living exactly as you have lived before. It involves a particular kind of joyousness. It is a discovery that to accord with the universe, one has but to live. And when this is fully understood, it becomes possible to live one's life with a particular zest and abandon. There are no longer any obstacles to thinking and feeling. You may let your mind go in whatever direction it pleases. For all possible directions are acceptable, and you can feel free to abandon yourself to any of them.
I love that quote, I think that's from... Let me have a look. I think that's from the Joyce Cosmology.
Sounds like it.
But I might be wrong, or it might be from the book, actually. Become What You Are. It's from one of these. It's a transcription. Become What You Are. So Become What You Are is a transcribed book after... posthumously published. Yes, so spiritual freedom involves much more than going on living exactly as you were before.
Again, the last line, and you can feel free to abandon yourself to any of them, meaning particular zest in life. And let your mind go in whatever direction it pleases. And all possible directions are acceptable.
Yeah. They're acceptable because you've abandoned yourself. And you're allowing life just to live you, like what we were talking about with the last quote. You've essentially abandoned your persona.
Yes. Basically.
You've thrown the keys out.
Give up your ego.
Yeah,
you've
given it up. And it's not that you don't live as a person. Obviously, the person, this thing keeps going on, this bag of meat. But you have a joyousness and zest about yourself. And a freedom, and it's in the face, it's in the glow on the face, and like there's no concerns.
Yeah.
Shanti, it's all good. All good. There's a deep recognition that this is not going to be around forever, but you're in the present, you're living life, and you can abandon your existence to anything that presents itself in life.
I think that feeling is best to describe when we were traveling India, for example. There is no room for your plan or your ideas how it's gonna be like. You just have to be ready to accept whatever happens. But again, the funny thing is, that's why it's most incredible and outstanding experience in your life, isn't it?
The greatest.
Yeah.
It's like you saying that. It's like, you know, all these people, especially in America, all of these entrepreneurs who are micromanagers and planners. The way to crack them spiritually and to really open them up is like, I want you to get a one-way ticket to India. Come with us, and I want you to plan for us. And you're coming with us, but plan how
you would plan microplane.
Yeah, microplane, how we're going to travel here. We're going to do this. Nothing works. Nothing works. You have to let go and allow life to happen.
Yeah.
It's like going to Thailand and going, why is this bus not here at 5? You don't understand Thai time? They say 5, they mean 7. You got to like, you know, you got to loosen up.
Yes.
And again, abandon yourself to the experience.
That's right.
Stop planning and trying to control the reality. Like you said, traveling in India is a good example. You can plan certain things. We've planned tours there, but even planning the tours don't turn out right. The taxi driver's late, you know, all sorts of chaos happens. But it's great. And everyone that has come on the tour with us, they've loved it, right? Like you have all sorts of odd experiences because that's what India is full of. So, but what it teaches you a place like that is to let go, and once you let go, you feel that joyousness more. Actually, controlling and planning is stress. It's instantly stress because you're living in a certain world, and the life is uncertain, and you haven't come to that conclusion.
It's spacious.
Spacious, yeah.
Your life is so spacious. Your mind is so spacious, and you can breathe again, because you don't have to think about everything, and it does it for you. You don't have to be concerned about anything, really.
No.
Yeah, that's the I think biggest thing for both of us, actually, having big problem living in place like here in Australia. Still is. I don't think I can ever be adjusted to fully to this, because you have kind of your life itself like it's necessary to plan some things to basically to maintain your livelihood, so to say, right? And there is no space. It's just full of thoughts and plans and ideas, and like just day is just full, right? And that's why no wonder people suffer from anxiety and panic attacks and this and that. But for us, what the difference is that we have experienced that such spacious life. So that's why it's more difficult for us to go through this time, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of like things that in these sorts of developed Western countries that, you know, they're built on planning and controlling, and even though, you know, you can divorce yourself from that completely, and you can choose another path, but often we get ourselves in situations where you require this and that to just get through the day, and that's a stress on anybody, right? And that's why we're counting down the clock.
Yeah, that's right.
But you know, it's we've structured societies and cultures and everything in the wrong way in the modern world, because it's all about like getting ahead, achieving things, jumping one hurdle after another. And you actually have no time to just breathe and enjoy life. That's one of the big things, right? You don't have any time to just sit back and enjoy and soak in the experience. And so what Alan's talking about is living a life where you're constantly soaking in the experience.
That's right.
You are just drenched with joyousness. You're drenched. You don't have like any idea of like, I have this aim, I want to get to here. You're living in the sense of Zhuangzi, like with an aimlessness in life. And that can happen in any culture, mind you, but it may require a bit more effort in certain places like Australia, America, or Europe, or somewhere like this, that are built on a go-getter attitude, So go-getters are very comfortable in places like Australia. But a go-getter is not going to be comfortable in somewhere like Nepal, because Nepal teaches you got to chill, bro. It doesn't matter. We get there in time. We get there.
I think that's one of the reasons why some people really hate those places to travel.
Yeah, to travel.
They really can't handle 1 week and they just quick.
Well, we've seen that.
They leave the country.
Yeah, we've seen
eventually.
We've heard people, things don't work in India, but like it's not where you're from.
Yes.
Why do you bring your idea of reality and try to influence them with your version of reality? This is how things work here.
Yeah.
Get used to it. Let go.
That's right.
Let go. You're too wound up tight.
Yes.
Take the screws out.
Yeah. Loosen your grip.
Loosen the grip.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's when you will have, like what said, that you'll abandon yourself to whatever experience occurs, right? Like he's a great example of that. Like he lived his life in that manner, in that fashion. You and I, we do our best to live our life in that fashion, and most people probably listening and watching too, right? It's a work in progress for most people, but like we all understand that the more we control, the more we plan, the less freedom and peace we have in our life. People say, but then I'll have financial freedom and this and that. Maybe, but sometimes when you have financial freedom, people don't actually know how to use their money. They get caught in the game of continuing their financial freedom, and again, they don't know how to smell the roses and just sit back and absorb the experience.
You never get out of the habit of accumulating dollars and cents, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, Alan only lived to 58, but those 58 years of his life were joyous, and he dived right into the experience.
Yes. I mean, we watched this footage by him in his property in California, how he walks about in the bush.
Conversations with myself.
Yeah. That was literally conversation with himself. Just walking on his own and.
Mark filmed.
Yeah, that's
Mark
what I was
that.
going to say.
Mark Watts
filmed it.
Yeah.
Yes. And just walking around with a cane stick. And with
like a proper Lao-tzu.
Yeah, like a really baggy sweater.
Yeah.
Walking around, and he's just gazing at the hills and mountains. And you see this nature at the mountains, and nature is wiggly.
You're wiggly.
As it goes up and down, and it goes this way, that way, and it's a curvy, and there's no real structure. But in our society, how we like to straighten the line and measure it and make sure it goes that way and this way, and how we structured our society, and that reflect on the way we think as well. It's not wiggly anymore. It's all measured, nicely analyzed and sanitized, and there is no room to move or adjust to anything that's different.
It's like when when the Europeans went to America, and the Europeans, they think in straight lines.
Yes.
And the native Indians, they think in circular patterns.
Yes.
They think in the wiggliness.
Yes.
In nature, like so. And that, again, reflects, individualistic and holistic psychologies, and which are, two parts of the brain, which I've talked about many times. But it's interesting because in the East, because the East is holistic, just like the native Indians, is that the wiggliness is what's everything is built off. Their societies, their cultures, their religions, not straight lines.
Yeah.
Not a linear approach. It's all non-linear.
Yes.
So, like Taoism is non-linear, right?
Yes.
Like there's all of these traditions are non-linear traditions. They're built sort of on nature. Hinduism is built off nature as well.
Yes.
And so that's why Sanatana Dharma is actually translated as the eternal natural way. It's not eternal, it's not like translated any other way.
It's more cyclical and
Patterns, yeah. It's like looking at a Mandelbrot set, like that fractal pattern,
Yeah.
So that idea of infinity is kind of held at the forefront of a lot of those traditions' minds.
Right.
And I think that comes from also living closer to nature in some sense for some of these traditions. So you incorporate yourself in that, where obviously when you're in analytical thinking, you're in the measurement process. You're in the Maya process of measuring things and this and that. And though that may be good to create medicine and stuff like this, even though medicine can be created obviously for the holistic mind, which is what we see with other traditions, but
from herbal medicine.
Yeah, herbal medicines and stuff like that. But you know what I mean? Like that,
Yes.
there are benefits to both psychologies.
Yes.
Because everyone has it, doesn't
Yes.
even matter in Easterner. One is just more amplified than the other. But the problem is when you're too analytical, you start to think too much in straight lines, and like what Watts is alluding to, like when he was up in Druid Heights there, up in his place, when he was talking about San Francisco, which isn't far away. San Francisco is like this grid pattern that just goes over like hills, and it's kind of ridiculous actually when you think about it. It's kind of like almost running against nature. Like instead of like working with the mountains, we've just built over the, over the hills and whatnot. And that's why you have these big steep roads and stuff like that in San Fran. And so, but up in Druid Heights, he's looking at nature and it's all wiggly. And that I love that actually video, that conversation with myself. If anyone hasn't watched that or listened to it, make sure you go out. You could probably find it on YouTube pretty easily.
Oh, yeah. And I thought just that the way he looked in that footage is to show like who he really is to me.
Yeah.
Like just he wants to be in nature and living in nature and seeing the such beauty of nature and being one with it.
He often talked about the aesthetic beauty of nature in a lot of his talks. And also in that one, it's really good, like, because he's making matcha tea.
Yeah.
Like,
The
and just
Japanese green tea.
having tea ceremony.
With
And
the bamboo whisker and little teacup.
yes, I mean, like if you're someone who likes excitement, you're probably not going to like this video. But if you've got a mind like Guy of mine, then you're going to really get a lot out of that video. But that's like you said, that really showcases who he was, right? Living close to nature, doing simple things like sipping a nice green tea, looking over the mountains. Oh man, like sign me up.
Yeah,
sign me up. How can I subscribe? All right, we come to the last quote. We didn't do these in any order of what's more so-called more profound of this and that. We just did it in whatever order Guy and I randomly had. So this is actually from Tao the Watercourse Way, and Alan kind of describes karma. Zitran means spontaneity of itself in Chinese, Zitran, and Shangshen, which is this idea of in Chinese of mutual arising. So interdependence. Yeah. So what you think is complete opposites, they're mutual, and so he's talking about these in relation to the mystery of duplicity, so to speak. So all right, this is like the Hindu Buddhist principle of karma, that everything which happens to you is your own action or doing. Thus, in many states of mystical experience or cosmic consciousness, the difference between what you do and what happens to you, the voluntary and the involuntary, seems to disappear. This feeling may be interpreted as the sense that everything is voluntary, that the whole universe is your own action and will. But this can easily flip into the sense that everything is involuntary. The individual and the will are nothing, and everything that might be called I is as much beyond our control as the spinning of the earth is in its orbit. But from the Taoist standpoint, these two views fall short. They are polar ways of seeing the same truth, that there is no ruler and nothing ruled. What goes on simply happens of itself, Zitran, without either push or pull, since every push is also a pull and every pull a push, as in using a steering wheel. This is then a transactional view of the world, for as there is no buying without selling and vice versa, there is no environment without organisms and vice versa. This is again the principle of mutual arising, Shangshen. As the universe produces our consciousness evokes the universe. And this relation transcends and closes the debate between materialists and idealists, or mentalists, determinists and free willers, who represent the yin and the yang of philosophical opinion. Love that quote. And that again goes back into the non-duality of things, right? Where, like, if you think about push, it's inescapable to think about pull at the same time. Because, you know what I mean? Like, because what is a push is a pull, like he said with the steering wheel, right? Steering wheel, you're moving it. Like, there's the opposites are there. They're not that they're apart, right? It's like talking about yin and yang and saying that the yin and yang exist without each other. Doesn't make any sense. That's why the little dots are within both in the symbolism.
Yeah. Because
they don't exist isolated from the other.
That's right.
They're inextricably connected. Then there's no disconnect.
It's almost the same thing.
It is the same thing.
It is the same thing.
But you got to think about it in that way, like
Yes.
in the push and the pull.
Yes.
You know, like what Alan says, like what goes on simply happens of itself. You know, it's not that there's like this will of God or something in some sense. You know, like God in a Christian sense, like blessing you and this and that. Everything's happening of itself because you're a part of this organism, which we could call whatever you want to call it. Give it whatever name you will, and we are growing of itself, right? So we are growing of itself, and then there's this aspect of Shangshen, this mutual arising, like this principle of, you know, and what he says beautifully, and I use this quite a lot in my books, is as the universe produces our consciousness evokes the universe. So that's one of the questions, right? Like when people talk about consciousness and the universe, you know, if you're not thinking about it in that sense, you'll just think, if you're thinking in a materialist sense, you think the universe produces consciousness.
Yeah.
But without consciousness, where does the universe exist?
Yes.
You see, this is the conundrum. But see, if you take that to a scientist, they will just then say, that's just woo. That's just like I don't want to.
Nothing to worry about.
Nothing to worry about. Like that, you're thinking too much about it. And it's like, no. You're discounting it because even in your observations, you said if there's no observer there, reality is a certain way.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, like that. Okay, so universe produces consciousness. And then, consciousness evokes
the universe. They go together. It's not that there's one. It's not that there's either or.
Yeah. Again, like, how could there be universe without consciousness, right? From the first place. So from the first place, there must been consciousness. Yeah.
All is Brahman.
So
all is Shiva.
Yes, it's vice versa.
Vice versa,
it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
This is why in the Heart Sutra, like you said, formless is emptiness and emptiness is form. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form, sorry. And so that's what this is. Samsara is nirvana, nirvana is samsara.
Right.
You can't have one without the other. They both go together as one. They are one.
Yeah. This is a completely like annihilating dualistic thinking, isn't it? What's good or bad?
Yeah.
I think this is good, so I do this way.
Yeah.
And I think that's bad, so I don't do this.
Yeah.
But it's completely gone away from their way of thinking.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, what they're sort of attacking in some sense or approaching is the dualistic mind, getting out of that partial analytical perspective that has a tendency to dissect the world into this and that. So we dissect, there's samsara, there's nirvana, they're two different things. So like the early Buddhist idea of, you get on the boat and you go across the river of samsara to the shores of nirvana, and then you just burn the boat. And you go, that's it, you go. But then in the Mahayana view is you go across the river, but you realize that once you got to the shore of nirvana was already on the other shore. But it may have taken you to get to that sort of recognition to understand that it is part of samsara itself. And so you send the boat back for someone else to make the same realization.
Right.
Or you jump back on the boat and go there.
Right.
So it's that idea, right, of that you're getting out of dualistic thinking. You're approaching this whole world from a perspective of what do you call it? Non-duality.
Yes. This is high level.
High level. Well, I write after, right? Consciousness and the universe cannot exist independent of each other. The mystery of duplicity is interwoven in the fabric of consciousness. We cannot have a sage without a warrior. They are not evolved. They are evolved and involved awareness of the cosmos. There is no good or bad, hot or cold, light or dark, and so on in the real world, as they are all measurements of Maya. As soon as we imply that an opposite exists, then duality is maintained. In the belief that things are separate, we are still trying to control the universe. So involution and evolution are inseparable states of consciousness, where the knower and the known become one. So
it is literally there is no this or that.
There's no this or that. Never has been.
That just we given the name.
We just given
That's
the name.
why
It's nama rupa, like I said.
Yeah, we believe in that.
It's a belief in that.
Believe in that. That's different.
Yep.
Yeah, but
We made a dissection between what's right, what's wrong, what's that, what's this, who I am, who you are.
So that's why in Buddhist practice, they make a big thing out of being able to see the world the way it is, instead of giving the name and judgment and things like that, just to see things as they are.
As they are. As they are. Don't superimpose your own beliefs and agenda onto the problem. Like in Taoism, that they would say that only contributes to the problem.
Yes.
What do I get on the channel sometimes? People saying, what would the Taoists say about this thing? They would say nothing about it.
Because it's very un-Taoist to say
to have
something,
an opinion on a thing, because that's just the course of nature. That's where spirituality begins. You have your mind caught in moralism and not in spirituality. You are confusing both.
In a sense that you can see it this way too, right? That in the world that we live in, is the culture-wise, it's just one-sided.
Yeah.
To see the world this or that.
Yeah.
And we are all handicapped to see there is no such thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like we are brainwashed.
Yeah.
Since
birth, yeah. And we're educated to uphold that illusion.
Yes.
Because that's what's productive for the society and the culture, and
to maintain the system that we built.
And like that quote you read before, what Alan said, this contributes to the inability to recognize or appreciate the mystical experience. Because the mystical experience is beyond this and that. and beyond worldly concerns and beyond worldliness. It's beyond all of that. You can either come into contact with that, or you can keep your mind involved in all these concerns that are eventually going to disappear anyway. They're temporary concerns, as we see with the nature of time, right? All of these things are temporary concerns. They come and go. Situation that we're in now all around the world, it's going to go. 20 years' time, people are probably not even going to think about it. Maybe we will, because we all lived through it. Everyone listening and watching. But the younger generation are just going to think, whatever. I didn't live through it. So, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like if you're investing your time and energy into that, but not...
So in the end, it's so insignificant.
It's insignificant, yeah. What is significant? Understanding the non-duality of the world is what is the most important thing in spirituality. That's what all the Eastern traditions are pointing to. Trying to cleanse your mind of this and that. Trying to get rid of that. And if you don't, you'll never understand the mystical experience. You know, you'll never feel shanti. You know? You'll never experience ananda, bliss. You won't have any of this. You won't feel the presence of Tao in your life.
So, like you mentioned that quote, and what I read is that the inability to have an experience of mystical reality is an intellectual handicap.
It's a handicap, yeah.
And the whole entire population is intellectually handicapped.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Everyone. And we're all brought up in it, like what you said.
Yes.
We are self-cultivated
Yes.
to uphold this illusion. And what does the illusion bring? Or what does the illusion breed? It breeds conflict, it breeds confusion, it breeds a disharmonious world.
And we are, just like we are domesticated to think and behave that way.
Exactly. And only these sorts of traditions are on the fringes.
Yes.
And hence why it was important when the Cultural Revolution happened in China, when Mao went on a rampage on Buddhism and Taoism. Because he can't live in a society where Marxism can't thrive when that sort of mystical version of reality is lingering around. Sure, you can say, okay, Buddhism and Taoism still exist in China, kind of, but it's a very watered down version, and it's a very suppressed version that only the general Chinese people kind of acknowledge as their history. But that's what they acknowledge. Like, okay, I go to temple on Tomb Sweeping Day and, you know, acknowledge my ancestors and so forth and so on. But it's not like something that's ingrained like Hinduism in India, right? You walk every corner, there's a shrine, there's a temple, and people are there all day, every day.
Yeah. It's culture of India that is.
Yeah, that's a culture.
But there is no more culture in China.
In China.
Traditional Chinese.
Mao did a
culture.
good job. Xi Jinping's doing a good job, right? Of, you know, eliminating any form of spirituality. Look at the weaker people in Xinjiang, right? So,
and like you said, then they acknowledging certain day to worship the ancestor and whatnot. This is all just a superficial things, and also that actually contribute back to the communist idea.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
Yep. Well, that's why I mentioned effortless living. Like if you look at Taoism in China, and as you know, I wrote most of that book back in 2013, even though it was published in 2018, is if you look at most of Taoism in China these days, it's often confused with Chinese folk religions. So old Chinese folk religions like Taoism will be intermingled with them, and then also intermingled with Confucianism, and it's hard to discern for Chinese people what is Taoism, what's Confucianism, what's Chinese folk religion. Like it's all intermingled and mixed, and
a lot of people regard it as a religion.
Yeah, they regard it not as a spiritual path or a philosophy or a mind science. Like, you know, like Buddhism, for example, is a mind science, right? It's not a religion, but people categorize it as a religion because they see, in Thailand, for example, they see Thai people praying at the Buddha, but it's more about respect and paying respect to ancestors and so forth and so on. It's not quite, you know, it's just your stereotype. Yes, their culture. It's not the stereotypical religion we think of Islam or Christianity.
Yeah, it's not organized religion.
No, it's not an organized religion.
It's much more ingrained into their culture.
Yeah, it's a cultural philosophy.
Yeah.
Cultural. It's a culture.
It's a culture.
It's a culture.
And the philosophy is the very foundation of that.
Yeah. So these sorts of mystical paths have always been dangerous, right? And particularly in a place like China that is trying to have been trying to eliminate religion since Mao's time, and they're not doing a bad job at that, you know. So I mean, it's not a good job. Don't get me wrong, but they're not doing a bad job at achieving their objective.
Yes.
Which is the promotion of Marxism. And this is why someone like Jordan Peterson has been constantly harping on about the dangers of Marxism. And people are not recognizing the dangers of such an ideology because it suppresses freedom of speech, suppresses freedom of religion, all these things. Just in general, it suppresses the individual in a sense. And you know, it turns everything into a clash of minorities versus majorities and all this sort of nonsense that we see going on in the world these days, which we don't want to get into because that's a whole other side topic. But that's again to heighten and illustrate the fears that a lot of societies have had of the mystical experience.
Right.
The fears they've had of it. Because if you are like, I'm up in the mountains with the yogis, and then everyone listening to you and I now, they're like, you know what? I'm done with life. They throw their clothes on. It's not like Gurdjieff said, it's not beneficial for the progress of society, but it's beneficial for the progress of the individual, the spiritual progress, you know. So society is constantly opposing you and your spiritual evolution.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it's telling you, hey, man, you better, you know, get a job, get a mortgage, make sure you have a truckload of kids, get that car you always wanted that you can't afford.
Yeah, that's right. When you embrace the mystical experience, right, then you start to think otherwise.
Yeah.
And that otherwise thinking is not beneficial to maintain economy.
Yeah.
And somewhere like China is practicing in the national scale.
Yeah, national scale, yeah. It's a big thought experiment.
From the top down.
Yep. And other nations are slowly copying that model. There are elements of America that are copying that model, and we all know that. No one wants to talk about it because the so-called progressives in America are actually mimicking Marxist ideology. But that's a whole other conversation, you know.
It's concerning.
It's concerning, yeah. But the whole idea is that it's threatening.
Yep.
And so, no surprises, Alan was living up in the mountains, disconnected from any sort of social, so-called setting like he would have had in San Francisco. And you know, this is one of the really good quotes. Like you said, it's a pretty deep quote.
It's a very high level.
Yeah. Because when you start to contemplate that the universe produces consciousness and consciousness evokes the universe, it instantly, like, again, it's like the koan I mentioned earlier, the 3 pounds of flax. It throws your mind out of analytical and rational thinking because it's that argument. What's first, the chicken or the egg? See? Where's the answer?
Don't know.
There is no answer. You see? So you've got this game of... we have this duplicity, this game that we play, but there's an essential mystery to it. It's not separate. You know, it's like that idea of Shang-Sheng. They mutually arise. You know, I mentioned this also about yoga. You know, I mean, the tradition of yoga, like, you know, traditional yoga was a sitting practice, movement, and so non-doing and doing naturally mutually arise.
Came together.
You don't start with non-doing, and you go, or going from doing to non-doing, and so forth and so on. They both mutually arise, and that's how existence is. That's what Zitran is, a spontaneity of itself. That's why any great idea you came up with or anything like that, you didn't sit there and, like, you weren't analysing, and it just came. You don't know why. It just happened.
It just comes on.
Just comes. You don't know why you have certain experiences. It just happens. Can you see that, though? Can you see it? You know what I mean? Because that's what nature is.
Can you catch it?
Can you catch it?
Comes?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a recognition of that.
That's right.
And Alan Watts resembles that, right? He was someone who just came off of themselves and transformed the world, essentially. Is still transforming the world. You know.
I think so. Yeah.
100%. You don't have to think so, because that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Because that's the genius of Alan, right? Like, so.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's just so much you could talk about him. Like, there's thousands of quotes that we have that we just highlighted those sorts of ones because they, you know, are pretty poignant. But if anything in the world these days, starting to read and listen to Alan Watts is a good start. And in some sense a good end for people too. You know, if you look at all of the chaos and all of this uncertainty and that people think that they're experiencing in the world, read the book. You know what I mean? Listen to do you do it or does it do you?
Yes.
Listen to these talks and, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun and it gives you such relief, I think. I don't know what it is, but just how... You remember that lecture, that how he was imitate how kids play. And they find it so fun and interesting, and that childlike mind is that innocence and just like finding fun in just strange and odd things, you know. Like that was kind of his spirit, and
he had that childlike mind forever.
Yeah,
I love that part of the thing. Like that's what he said. He said, kids, they know it's not serious. They're looking at us adults. They know it. They know it's not serious. So they're like, you know, so they're doing all sorts of things because they know it's just fun. This is weird. Like what Alan said that time. He said, "Don't you think existence is weird?" Like and like when you put it, if you put it to a person who's never contemplated existence, it is actually a profound statement. Don't you think that it's just weird, like what you are and this and that? Like I told you about with my brother, when I was about 12, 13, and I'm looking at my brother and he's like, "What are you looking at?" And I'm like, "Don't you think like what's reality?" Like, and he's like, you know, going off and have a bit of the wacky. Like, what are you on? I never even had marijuana by that time, you know what I mean? So like, I was like, but like, haven't you thought about like what this reality is? Like, we're here. It's weird, isn't it weird? Like, we're just here. Strange.
It is strange.
It's a strange thing.
I think that again, that's so unpolluted, innocent inquiry that is, isn't it? Like because, I mean, we all have ability to think, and we are conscious of ourselves, and it's kind of the very fundamental, innocent wonder about living beings in general. I think, and I think that's what Alan Watts had for entire lifetime, and again, more curious about these fundamental things, more chance that you will find pure joyous life in this lifetime. I think, because from being curious and having wonder about life in such manner is the only way that we can find the real, I mean, let's say meaning or purpose of life, if there is such thing. Because again, like exploring that meaning of life and having that pure wonder about life, that itself is a journey, and in that journey we find such joy and pleasure and fun. Right?
Yeah, of course.
So I think that innocence is something we have to all have.
Yeah. Kind of what you're talking about is like not, because there's not so much a meaning of life, so to speak, like not something that you can really determine, but it's a feeling, like what Joseph Campbell said, it's more so that feeling of being alive.
That's right.
You know, and that's what that child has, right? That intense feeling of being alive. That's why everything's fun for them. And we were all children once, right? you'd be playing with grass and like things that like
Yeah.
you think about it now, like you're out there playing like with rocks and stuff, and you're like, what the hell? Like, how's the kid get enjoyment out of that? But it's the unpolluted mind.
And again, I think that is to show also how children have innocence, because they're closer to that
Source.
the source and the life, right? And we get older and
Worn out.
yeah, worn out. We get to know the world, right? And then we lose sense of innocence because we are no longer in touch with that life again, right? So I think that's why it's important to keep that innocence and just a wonder about things and again, to be able to do that, you have gotta give yourself more space and more time in nature, and inquiring more things. I think.
And that's what Alan taught us, right? He taught us to stay a child,
Yeah.
stay humble, stay innocent,
Yeah.
and that's why he had an intense curiosity for life. Everything was fun for him.
Yeah.
That's why, actually, with that curiosity, he created all the great work that he has created.
Absolutely.
That's what's happened, right? So, and that's what he leaves behind, and that's the message he leaves for us too, is that we don't have to take life so seriously, and we need to come back into contact with that child within us. That unpolluted mind is still there. It's still there. You've covered it over with concern and worry,
Yes.
beliefs, opinions, agendas. But it's just like cleaning the window. You just get a bit of spray. The spray can be meditation or contemplation, and just wipe the window clean. And come back to the way nature really is, the way life really is, and enjoy.
Yes.
That's what you and I do.
Yeah.
And the reason why you and I enjoy is because of people like Alan Watts, which we're extremely grateful for.
Oh yeah.
So if Alan's listening, we all love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we hope you guys enjoyed. We could talk about Alan all day, there's no doubt. But we think we talked enough and explored his teachings a lot. And highly recommend any of his books, any of his lectures. Like we said, go out and watch. You could probably watch for free Conversations with Myself. Even you could watch Eastern Wisdom for Modern Living, probably.
Yeah, I think it's out there.
It's out there. And so we love you guys too, and we'll see you guys next time.